Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into 8 Banana Republics today. It's a book that really makes you rethink U.S. involvement in Latin America in the early 20th century.
Yeah, happy to be here. It definitely challenges a lot of the narratives you might think you know about this period.
So 8 Banana Republics, I mean, where do we even begin with a title like that?
Well, it gets at, I think, the core argument of the book, which is that U.S. intervention in Latin America wasn't always about spreading democracy or freedom. It was often about protecting, well, bananas, or really, I guess more accurately, protecting the economic interests of powerful corporations, often at the expense of the people actually living in those countries.
So less about Uncle Sam spreading democracy,
Yeah.
more about him protecting his fruit salad.
Yeah. I guess you could say that. Yeah, and the book starts off with a really interesting take on the Spanish-American War. And and we often think of this as a decisive US victory, but 8 Banana Republics really points out that Cuban rebels had been fighting the Spanish for years before the US even got involved.
Hold on. So you're telling me the U.S. kind of swoops in the last minute and gets to be the hero, even though Cuba had been fighting for its independence like this whole time? That sounds a little familiar.
I know, right? And it gets even more interesting. So the book talks about how Cuban representatives were basically excluded from the treaty negotiations that ended up deciding their country's fate after the war. So they fight for their freedom. The U.S. steps in, and then they don't even get a seat at the table to talk peace.
Wow. Okay, so not exactly a shining moment for U.S. foreign policy there. But how does this Banana Republic thing, how does that actually play out in real life?
Well, the book goes really deep into the story of Samuel Zemery and the Cuyamel Fruit Company in Honduras, and it's a wild ride.
Say I'm the banana man. Let me guess. This guy wasn't exactly handing out free fruit baskets to everyone.
You'd be surprised. He loved those bananas, and he wasn't afraid to play a little dirty to protect his business. So picture this. It's the early 1900s. Zemery wants to expand his banana empire in Honduras, but the president at the time, President Davila, he's got this crazy idea that maybe Honduras should benefit from its own resources.
You mean like actually taxing the companies that are profiting off of their land? How radical.
Right, but Zemery, he wasn't having any of it. So when a rebellion pops up against Davila, led by this former president Manuel Bonilla, guess who sees a golden opportunity?
I think I'm sensing a theme here. Our banana tycoon friend, he steps in to help things along.
That's right. The book suggests that Zemery essentially bankrolled this whole rebellion, weapons, a yacht, you name it. It's like he said, "Here's what you need to overthrow the government. Just promise me you'll go easy on those banana taxes when you're in charge."
Hold up. So the U.S. is supposed to be promoting democracy, and this guy is just out here funding coups to avoid paying taxes. What did the U.S. government have to say about this?
Officially neutrality, but 8 Banana Republics suggest that they weren't exactly innocent bystanders in all of this. For example, when Bonilla's forces captured this crucial port in Honduras, guess what happened to be nearby?
Don't tell me. A U.S. warship.
You got it. And they didn't lift a finger to stop it. Almost like they were, shall we say, encouraged by this turn of events.
Wow. So Honduras basically becomes this testing ground for U.S. intervention, all in the name of bananas.
Yeah. And that's what 8 Banana Republics argues. Honduras was like a microcosm of this much larger pattern playing out. The U.S. using its power, often in pretty shady ways, to prop up leaders who would keep those bananas flowing, keep U.S. corporate interests, keep them happy.
And this wasn't just Honduras, right? I mean, this was happening all over Latin America.
Absolutely, yeah. 8 Banana Republics argues that this kind of intervention, often justified as promoting stability, it was really about creating this system where certain countries were essentially beholden to the U.S.
Almost like they created the very instability that they were claiming to be fighting against. But hold on, we've been talking a lot about the U.S. side of things. What's the book say about how people in Latin America actually reacted to all of this?
That's what makes this book so fascinating, right? It doesn't just focus on the U.S. perspective. It really highlights the voices of resistance, the individuals and movements that stood up to this dominance.
Well, you know what they say, where there's a banana peel, there's bound to be someone who slipped on it and decided to fight back.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this resistance.
Yeah, so one of the most compelling stories in the book is about this guy Benjamin Zeldin in Nicaragua, and he dared to oppose U.S. influence, even leading a rebellion against this U.S.-backed government. Real David and Goliath kind of situation.
Okay, I'm hooked. We're gonna have to hear more about Zeldin and this resistance movement right after
Yeah, absolutely. It's a story that shows the real like human cost of these interventions and the incredible courage of those who dared to fight back. So yeah, we left off with Benjamin Zeldin, this guy who stood up to U.S. power, even though things weren't exactly in his favor.
Right. Talk about a cliffhanger. So what happened to this guy? It sounds like he was fighting like an uphill battle the whole way.
It really was, yeah. The book talks about how he became kind of the symbol of resistance against U.S. intervention in Nicaragua. He really believed in Nicaragua that was free from foreign control, both politically and economically.
It's easy to just, throw around phrases like fighting for freedom, but this guy was like putting it all on the line. What did that actually look like for him?
Yeah, so Eight Banana Republics really gets into how Zeldin challenged this U.S.-backed government. He actually ended up leading this rebellion that ultimately, it failed. He was captured and executed. It's tragic, but it really speaks to the human cost of U.S. intervention in Latin America.
Yeah, talk about putting a face to a historical conflict. It's easy to forget those details when you're just reading about it in a textbook.
Absolutely, and what's even more powerful, I think, is that Zeldin's his defiance, it didn't die with him, right? It actually ended up inspiring others, including a young Augusto Cesar Sandino to kind of continue that fight for a truly independent Nicaragua.
Okay, I see where this is going. Sandino, the Sandinistas.
Mm-hmm.
It's all starting to click now. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up for a second. Eight Banana Republics doesn't just focus on the political side of things here, right? It really digs into the whole economic system that was kind of propping up all of this intervention in the first place.
100%. Yeah. The book argues that these U.S. corporations, with the help of their government, they weren't just interested in bananas, right? They wanted to control the entire economic system to create these conditions that were favorable to their own profits, even if it meant exploiting, workers and resources.
So we've talked a lot about, Zemre and his whole banana empire down in Honduras. What were the working conditions actually like for the people who were, growing and harvesting those bananas?
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Eight Banana Republics talks about how companies like the KML Fruit Company, they wielded immense power. Imagine working on a plantation, not for a fair wage or anything, but for whatever scraps the company decided to throw your way. And if you dared to speak up or to organize or demand something better.
I'm guessing they weren't exactly met with open arms and a fair negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. Unions were suppressed, wages were kept low, and dissent was often met with force. And the book argues that the U.S. government was often complicit in this, turning a blind eye to the exploitation because it ultimately, benefited their economic interests.
Yeah. It's one thing to, hear about these injustices in a general sense, but Eight Banana Republics really drives it home with, these vivid descriptions, these personal stories. Do you remember any particular examples that really stood out to you?
Oh, for sure. One that comes to mind is this thing called the water cure, which was used on suspected insurgents in the Philippines.
Wait, the Philippines? I thought we were talking about Latin America here.
We are, but the book actually draws these parallels between U.S. actions in the Philippines and Latin America, arguing that they were both driven by this same kind of imperialist impulse. But anyway, the water cure, it was a truly horrific form of torture. They would force you to drink, gallons and gallons of water, often through a bamboo tube, until your stomach was like grotesquely distended. And if you didn't give your torturers the confessions they wanted, well, let's just say it got even uglier.
That's just barbaric.
Yeah.
And they justified this in the name of what? Spreading democracy, protecting American interests.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a chilling reminder of how easily power can corrupt, and how dangerous ideologies can be used to justify even the most horrific actions.
It's easy to think about these events as, ancient history, but Eight Banana Republics really forces us to confront the legacy of this period. This stuff has staying power.
You're right. This isn't just about the past, right? These events, they've had a lasting impact on U.S. Latin American relations, and they continue to shape the world that we live in today.
So we've talked about U.S. intervention, economic exploitation, the resistance movements that rose up against it. But what about like the racial dynamics at play here? Eight Banana Republics touches on this idea of Anglo-Saxon superiority and how that kind of thinking influenced U.S. actions in Latin America.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the story. The book argues that this belief in Anglo-Saxon superiority, it wasn't just, some abstract idea. It was used to justify everything from, westward expansion to the suppression of indigenous populations to the interventions in Latin America.
It's like they truly believed that they were on this civilizing mission, bringing progress and enlightenment to these supposedly backward people.
Exactly. Yeah. And this like paternalistic attitude, this idea that they knew what was best for these countries, it went hand in hand with this deep distrust and frankly disdain for anyone deemed different. The book highlights how this played out in the treatment of, Native American populations within the US who are often seen as obstacles to progress rather than, equal partners in nation building.
It's heartbreaking, but not surprising given the history of how Native Americans have been treated in this country.
Yeah, and this prejudice, it extended to those of Hispanic descent as well, particularly as the U.S. expanded its influence in the Southwest and Latin America. Eight Banana Republics argues that these racist attitudes, they were deeply ingrained in U.S. society, and they ended up influencing everything from immigration policies to foreign interventions.
So it's like this white man's burden thing, this belief that the U.S. had like a duty to uplift and to civilize these other cultures, even if it meant, using force.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of thinking, it was used to justify all sorts of interventions from the Caribbean to the Philippines.
And Eight Banana Republics argues that this wasn't just some, abstract ideology. It had very real and often brutal consequences for people.
Absolutely. The book, it doesn't shy away from the violence and the oppression that often came with U.S. intervention. It challenges us to look beyond those kind of sanitized versions of history that we often hear, and to confront the darker side of this period in history.
It makes you wonder, like, if this book is shining a light on these kind of lesser known aspects of history, what else might we be missing from the traditional narratives?
Ooh, that's a great question. And it's something that Eight Banana Republics really encourages us to think about. Who gets to tell the story? Whose voices are amplified? Whose are silenced? And it argues that by digging deeper, by looking for those missing voices, we can gain a much richer and more accurate understanding of the past.
And that more nuanced understanding of history, I mean, it helps us make sense of the present too, right? Because we're still grappling with the legacy of these interventions today.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt, yeah. The book really shows how these historical events, they've had this lasting impact on the relationship between the U.S. and Latin America, and it's a complex legacy. It's marked by both cooperation and conflict, and it continues to shape the world that we live in even today.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Right?
Yeah.
We've talked about bananas, interventions, resistance movements, racial dynamics. It's a lot to process.
Mm-hmm.
As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, is there one like key takeaway that you hope our listener walks away with? What's the big aha moment from Eight Banana Republics?
I I think the most important takeaway is that history is never simple, right? It's not just a collection of dates and battles. It's about people, their choices, their struggles, and the often, unintended consequences of those choices.
Hmm.
Eight Banana Republics, it encourages us to ask those hard questions, to challenge the stories that we've been told, and to consider the perspectives of those who have often been, written out of the history books.
It's one thing to read a book about history, but it's another thing entirely to really engage with it, to have a conversation about it, and to let it challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've tried to do
I
today.
think that's what makes this deep dive format so valuable, right? It's not just about, summarizing information. It's about exploring it together, asking questions, making those connections.
Exactly. So to our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity, maybe given you some new perspectives to consider. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What surprised you? And what questions are still kind of swirling around in your head? For me, I'm left thinking about the ripple effects of history, like how events that happened, a century ago can still be shaping the world we live in today. It's a reminder that the past isn't really past. It's always present in some form, shaping our present and our future.
That's a powerful thought to end on. History isn't just something we study. It's something we live with and learn from every single day.
Expert speaker, as always, been a pleasure picking your brain today.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.